The question, and I'm told that we do have D. Wood back with us, so let me bring Damian Woody into the conversation. Good morning, D. Wood. Are the Broncos a sneaky good option for Deshaun Watson?
I really like the Denver Broncos, Greeny, because, you know, we've been talking ad nauseum about the Denver Broncos and their inability to solve the quarterback position. But if you look at this team, look at the pieces that will be around Deshaun Watson. Denver has a good defense. And Mark Schlereth talked about the pieces on offense, particularly at the skill position. They got a couple good running backs. They got Noah Fant, the tight end, who's pretty good. And they got 3 young wide receivers who have the potential to be dynamic in the National Football League. So if you add a Deshaun Watson to that mix, who, in my opinion, you know, just behind Patrick Mahomes is Deshaun Watson, now you're talking about a division in the AFC West where you have Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, you know, all those different quarterbacks in that division. That would be money that I would pay to go see in that division.
Absolutely. Justin Herbert would be another one, the rookie sensation there with the Chargers. So I'll ask you the same question, Chris Canty, that I asked you a moment ago about Indianapolis. Put Deshaun Watson on Denver. What are the Broncos?
I think that's a team that can compete for a wild card. I mean, I just think that the ceiling on them is a little bit limited just based on the division that they're in. But if you look at the landscape of the AFC West, right now the Broncos have the worst quarterback, and you could probably make an argument that Drew Lock might be as low as 5th if you include Marcus Mariota, the backup at the Raiders. So I think it's a situation where John Elway should try to push his chips to the middle of the table and see if he can pull off a deal to get Deshaun Watson, just because you don't have an opportunity to compete otherwise.
The question, Yates, is what chips does Elway have to push to the middle? We sometimes talk about it, and I guess we're as guilty of this as anyone. We sometimes talk about this like Deshaun Watson is a free agent. He's not. They have to figure out a way, whoever it is, to make a trade with the Texans. So in that regard, Yates, how do the Broncos look as a possibility?
Yeah, I think if you're their new general manager, George Paton, you're probably having to ante up with the 9th overall pick in this year's draft, a first-round pick in 2022, a first-round pick in 2023, and potentially some other goodies. And I say other goodies because I don't want to be specific with a draft pick or a player without knowing specifically what Houston would covet. So it's going to cost a ton, and it's going to be an all-in move for the Broncos. I like the fit because I like the fit for basically Deshaun Watson anywhere. One point that I think is important to reinforce, and Damian was getting there when noting that it's a division that already includes Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert, is that there's not a scenario where you can play really good defense and get by on offense and win the AFC West. You have to be bold and audacious to win this division. You have to have a franchise-level quarterback because the Chiefs aren't going anywhere. The Chargers are going to get there in their rise and stay there because of Justin Herbert. If I'm George Paton, and I've had all these years, even though I wasn't there, of trying to figure out a quarterback plan without Peyton Manning, if this opportunity presents itself, heck yeah. And I know it's going to cost a ton. But if it's 3 first-round picks plus more, I'm comfortable with that. A 25-year-old quarterback with 5 years left on his deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no team in the league that wouldn't, practically no team in the league that wouldn't do anything they could to wind up getting Deshaun Watson. Right. So, Chris Canty, quick final thought. When it's all said and done, what do you think winds up happening? Because the Texans continue to insist they're not going to trade him. Do you believe Watson will change teams between now and the draft?
No, I absolutely think he's going to change teams. It's just a matter of where he's going to go. And if I'm the Houston Texans, I want to ship him as far away from me as I possibly could, potentially in the NFC. So that's what I would be looking to do. But there are some teams in the AFC that make sense because you look at the New York Jets, your New York Jets, they got the 2nd overall pick, which is a huge bargaining chip in these negotiations for compensation going back to the Texans, as well as the Miami Dolphins that have the 3rd overall pick. So I just think that would be interesting. But if I'm the GM, if I'm Nick Caserio, I want Deshaun Watson out of the conference.
Yeah, and you want him out of the conference, and you probably want to make this deal the sooner you can, because once these other trades wind up getting made here, you start losing a little bit of the extraordinary leverage. Okay, so much more football as we go, but as you may...
I think it puts them in a very tough spot in terms of how to handle a legend with that franchise. Ben Roethlisberger is not the quarterback that can push the ball down the field like we could in yesteryear, and because of that, it limits your offense. So, in my opinion, I think there's a cap on how good the Steelers could be in 2021 with him under center, just because he limits what your offense can do.
And as you heard the GM talking, did it remind you of anything else we've heard in the NFL in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, not so long ago, we heard the general manager for the Los Angeles Rams, Les Snead, say that Jared Goff was their quarterback for the moment, it kind of gives off the same vibe what Kevin Colbert said from the Pittsburgh Steelers yesterday.
Yeah, Les Snead said that, and about a week later, Jared Goff was a Detroit Lion. We're not suggesting that's on the verge of happening here with Ben, but you never know. All right, let's go to Field on this here as we're working with D. Wood's Signal. Field, what is your perspective on this and on Roethlisberger, on the money and the option here that we might be seeing the end of an extremely successful era?
Yeah, first of all, Greeny, this kind of came out of nowhere, right? It's not that we didn't think that Ben Roethlisberger was going to have to redo his contract, but I think many, myself included, figured, oh yeah, Ben's just going to redo his contract and he'll be back with the Steelers. Now, the idea that Ben Roethlisberger won't be a Steeler has at least entered the conversation. So you mentioned the $41.5 million cap hit for Ben Roethlisberger. He's going to count no matter what, $22.5 million for the Steelers this year. This problem is somewhat self-inflicted by the Steelers because they've been pushing his cap hit further and further and further down the road until this year. But they also had no control over the COVID-19 pandemic. The part that I'm having the hardest time figuring out for the Pittsburgh Steelers is if they do move on from Ben Roethlisberger because they either can't find a middle ground on his contract or they just don't believe that Ben is the quarterback to lead them in 2021, where do they turn instead? There isn't an in-house option right now. Mason Rudolph is not a player that I believe can take the Steelers back to the playoffs next season. And because of where they're going to draft this year, having had a successful, for the most part, 2020 season, it's not like there's any guarantee they could pick a quarterback that could immediately come in and revitalize this offense. The Steelers are one of the teams, along with the Saints and the Eagles, that could look as different as any other from 2020 to 2021. This Ben wrinkle is very fascinating.
It is. So, Chris, I mean, it's a complicated situation you face because he's a legend and he's done enormous things for your franchise, and you want to let him sort of go out in a graceful way. But at the same time, if you have made the decision that with Roethlisberger, your future has a limit, then maybe the key is to start moving on as quickly as possible. The franchises have to balance that, and this is a complicated one.
No, it is complicated, but I think it's a situation where they got to go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off because they can't move this program forward with Ben Roethlisberger being on this team because, as I mentioned before, he's a limited quarterback. In throws of 20 yards down the field or more, an adjusted completion percentage, Ben Roethlisberger among starters ranked 27th, which is right behind Jared Goff and right in front of Andy Dalton. That's where you don't want to be if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. So at some point, you're going to have to move off of him, and it just feels like this is the opportunity that you have to do that in. It doesn't feel great, but you can't let Ben Roethlisberger cost you the potential free agents that you'd like to keep in Pittsburgh.
Well, I get that part of it, and that is they have to figure out money for a bunch of other guys, including some big names on defense that they'll have to pay. But it's easy to say move on. It's complicated, as Field is saying, to say move on to whom? This is not a team that rebuilds. They reload on the fly. So if not Ben next year, then who?
Well, I think you have to look at Mason Rudolph and Dwayne Haskins and see what you have there in a competition. But it's not going to be a pretty picture. It's not going to be a simple answer for Kevin Colbert. It's an ugly situation, but you also have to remember what is going to be the identity of your team moving forward. It's going to be on the defensive side of the ball. You'd like to hold on to some of those stalwarts that you have. Bud Dupree, a free agent that's impending. TJ Watt, they're going to have to address his contract. I would want to hang on to those guys more so than pay Ben Roethlisberger to be my quarterback.
Haskins is 2 years removed from being a high first-round pick in the NFL draft. He's a fascinating wild card in all of this. If they can unlock the